Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Nice to see you guys. Welcome to my room. In this video, I wanted to talk to you about the topic of introversion and, with it, I guess, by implication, extraversion. Um, Let me just fix this. Yeah, cool. I've been having these thoughts recently. These are thoughts that recur, in my ponderings about the not so much the difference between introversion and extroversion, but more the very categories that these names designate. And it's quite clear to me at this point that there's something good and bad about these categories. Of course, there is no question that there is a use to distinguishing between extroversion and introversion, and it makes sense to categorize certain people as being in the introverted category and other people as being in the extroverted category. Then you have people in the middle who are who, to the extent that we would talk about them as belonging to a certain type, would also qualify as introverts or extroverts. But really, if you ask them about how they perceive themselves and even how others perceive them, it would be quite frequent that in those cases they only identify as tending towards introversion or tending toward extroversion without necessarily seeing themselves as an actual extrovert or an actual introvert. And it's important to realize that when that is said about certain kinds of people, I think that sometimes people refer to those individuals as ambiverts. I don't know what my thoughts are on this particular topic, but what I would say about introversion and extroversion is that these are in flux. These are always in flux, and so there's a certain danger, I think, with placing too much emphasis on the category of introversion or extroversion. Now, I said earlier in the video that there's a good aspect to it and there's a bad aspect to it. So I think the good aspect to it is this. Up until not long ago, and I would say even up to this day, but less than before, being called introverted was a stigma. It was a pejorative term. It was something that was supposed to be overcome. If you were told, if you were called introverted, the implication was that you were cripplingly shy, and if you were not cripplingly shy, that you were just shy. So for the cripplingly shy, the implication was a kind of ought. You ought to become just naturally a bit shy, but not cripplingly so. And in the case of people who were shy, the ought statement was, by implication, you ought to open up, chill out, be more social, get out of your own world, make an effort to be less shy. But what's interesting about the distinction between shy and introverted in the old conception, it seems to me, is that if you were to call someone shy, it's kind of a description of who they are and how they behave in a certain context, whereas introverted carried with it the idea that, of course, it wasn't a disease or disorder, but it was almost like, I go so far as to say that it was almost like if you could picture the lightest form possible of a disorder, and you would never think about calling someone too extroverted. Notice this, right? This is a very interesting observation. You might have made it yourself before, but it would never occur to us to say someone, oh, this person is a bit too extroverted, they should make an effort. But there is such a thing as that person is too introverted. And so there is an asymmetrical relationship here. And this asymmetrical relationship has a bearing on both the positive and negative side of the introverts versus extrovert categories and their contemporary understanding, as I see it. I think that as we have evolved in our mentalities, we have really come to consider that introversion is just a way of being different from extroversion. You know, it's a different mode. It's a tendency towards a different mode of relationship, of relating to the world, really. If you look at it from the most fundamental perspective possible, it's, you know, whether you look at it from the perspective of release of chemicals in the brain, or from the perspective of energy expenditure, whether you spend your energy when you're by yourself and when you're with others. The idea is that there's a regulatory mechanism of personality that differs in the case of introverts and in the case of extroverts to some extent. You know, again, it's a gradation. It's a gradation of differences, but there is a difference. And from the moment that you look at it this way, well, in technical terms, I think the way that we could put it is by saying that the understanding of these categories is more and more being taken as a functional and descriptive difference rather than a normative difference. I think the difference before, and to an extent still today, is normative in the sense that it's seen as better to be extroverted, but I think it's less and less the case. And that's good. That's good. And hopefully, psychological models like Myers-Briggs, Big Five, maybe Enneagram as well, help to contribute to this transition from a normative difference toward a functional difference or a descriptive difference. Because once your description of the difference is purely functional, well, there's no longer any judgment of value coming with it, right? It's not better to be introverted, it's not better to be extroverted. And that's how it should be. Now, on the negative side, this is a development that I've noticed a bit more recently. And I have to say, I've noticed it only online, but it's probably not a complete surprise that I only saw it online, because the people who cultivate this kind of approach are online a lot of the time. And I think, again, if I wanted to use a slightly technical phrase, I would call it the essentialization of the categories of introversion and extroversion, or even more technically, the reification of those categories. But let's just say the essentialization. So the tendency that certain people have, and I don't think it's a good tendency, to essentialize themselves as introverts or extroverts. The reason why it's linked to the first and positive side of this discussion is that I think in the process of accepting themselves, introverts, I'm not mentioning extroverts, because extroverts by definition, for the majority of them, they're too busy doing something else than introverting on these questions, you know. So this is mostly a case for introverts asking themselves, what does it mean to be introverted? Is it something bad? Is it something to work on? You know, in the process of seeing themselves progressively differently. So from a perspective of perceiving themselves as lacking, you know, I'm lacking something, I need to fix this. So lacking in extroversion in this case. Introverts, I think, started to, and it was quite a big process, but introverts have gradually come to see themselves as not lacking, and in some cases as even being proud to be an introvert, to not see this as something to be ashamed of, but rather something to wear on their sleeves and to totally accept. And that's great. The problem is, the process of accepting your introversion as introversion carries with it implicitly the threat of essentializing the category of introversion, which then leads to problems. So if there is one insight that I would like you guys to keep from this video, it's this one, so I'll repeat it. the process of owning your introversion as introversion and being proud of it, so to speak, and accepting it carries with it the implicit danger of essentializing your introversion. And this is because usually when we're proud of something, or when we, claim something, own something, well, we have to consider this thing as a delimited something, as a category, and this category presents the risk of being essentialized into an unchangeable something rather than something that is changeable. So, for example, you could think of someone who's only very mildly introverted. Would it make sense for that person to be proud of their introversion if, by definition, they are susceptible of tending toward being slightly toward the extroverted one, or in the middle? I totally believe in the possibility for someone who is at a period in their life slightly to left of center. So if center is neutral between introversion and extroversion, introversion would be left, extroversion would be right. For someone to be slightly left of center, so someone who's, let's say, leaning toward introversion, at a later stage in their life to tend towards extroversion, so to be slightly right of center, or the reverse. Maybe the reverse. I don't know if the reverse is more common. It depends. My mother, for example, I can see empirically. I can look at her and I can definitely tell you that she's way more extroverted than she used to be. She would still be left of center, but instead of being 80% left of center, she's only 60 now. So you see, there's a change, and I think that if you observe people around you, you'll notice that change is real. So you can't essentialize yourself as being an introvert, because the risk is that you will end up either denying or neglecting the possibility of becoming less introverted, or for people who are extroverted, a bit more introverted. In general, I think that extreme introversion is of course, some people, I'm sure that for some people there's nothing they can do about it, but I do think that in a lot of cases, people who call themselves highly introverted, I have to be a little careful because I don't want to, shame them or anything. But I think that there are cases where the owning of this is such that they would not even give themselves a chance to engage in more extroverted activities, so to speak. So human beings are social beings. I'm a bit concerned about these people sometimes. I don't want them to think that it's healthy to always be on their own. And the essentialization of introversion carries that risk with it, because it's a normalization of activities that are not normal, such as the activity of always being on your own. You should not always be on your own. Even if you were to think about it in terms of functions, Jungian functions, every type, even a type whose dominant function is introverted, so introverted types, every type has two extroverted functions in their stack. Now, these extroverted function, in order to be healthy, needs to be engaged, and it is not true that you can engage them to their full potential by being on your own. Of course, when you're on your own, if you're chatting to people online, that's already kind of being social, but you're using your extroverted function to an extent, but you need to be out in the world, you need to talk to people, you need to engage with people as much as you can, respecting your energy expenditure and your own needs for personal space. To engage these functions, you need to you see, it's maybe even kind of misleading to say you need to extrovert, because it's almost like putting pressure on people who see themselves as introverts. But just say, we can just put it as, push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone. You could almost see the equivalent for an extrovert as needing sometimes to push themselves out of their comfort zone and try to work on being more self-aware, or being more introspective, because it is also true that a lot of extroverts, and I think maybe my dad at times, is guilty of that, is not introspective enough, and so that can lead to, miscalculating or misjudging the particular finer aspects of other people's personalities and motives, desires. So it's true for both cases, but in this video I wanted to focus on introverts specifically, and really emphasize that you are an introvert. If you're an introvert, and there's a lot of people in the community around my channel that are introverts, that's totally fine. I am an introvert myself, but do not essentialize your introversion. Do not unconsciously adopt a perspective whereby you see yourself as an embodied introvert, because you're always inhabiting a potential towards either more introversion but also more extroversion. I mean, it's there's a limit, I think, on both sides depending on where you start from, but you're always moving around. And so do not just say I'm an introvert, that's how I should be, because you could develop some bad habits and you could legitimize and normalize some unhealthy habits, such as the habits I said, thinking that you can do without people. You cannot do without people. And it's perfectly possible to be an introverted social person. Okay, so I'll stop here. This was just a little observation, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. See you guys.